"I can't believe I'm marrying that whale in a dress," I heard my future son-in-law say about my daughter before the wedding. He and his friends burst out laughing, but I was about to get the last laugh. I made a noise to get their attention, and then, "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached." I never imagined that at 64 years old, I would hear words that would shatter my heart into 1,000 pieces. Words that would make me question everything I thought I knew about the man my daughter was about to marry. It was a Tuesday afternoon, just 3 days before Briella's wedding. I had driven over to the venue to drop off the final floral arrangements, white roses and baby's breath, just like she had always dreamed of since she was a little girl. The Riverside Country Club was buzzing with activity. Staff members were setting up chairs, adjusting lighting, and transforming the elegant ballroom into what should have been the most beautiful day of my daughter's life. I parked near the service entrance, my arms full of the delicate centerpieces I had personally arranged. At my age, carrying heavy boxes wasn't the wisest idea, but I wanted everything to be perfect for Briella. She deserved nothing less than perfection. After her father passed away 5 years ago, it had been just the two of us, and seeing her happy again after years of grief meant everything to me. As I approached the side door that led to the bridal suite preparation area, I heard familiar voices coming from around the corner. Male voices, laughing loudly. I recognized Blaine's distinctive laugh immediately, that booming sound he made when he found something particularly amusing. I was about to call out to him when I heard my daughter's name. "I can't believe I'm marrying that whale in a dress," Blaine's voice carried clearly through the afternoon air. The words hit me like a physical blow. I stopped dead in my tracks, nearly dropping the flower arrangements. His friends erupted in laughter. Cruel, heartless laughter that made my stomach turn. "Dude, you're terrible," one of them said, still chuckling. "But seriously, why are you going through with it then?" There was a pause, and I held my breath, praying I had misheard, praying this was some terrible joke I didn't understand. "Trust me, it's worth it," Blaine replied, his voice taking on a calculating tone I had never heard before. "Her mom's loaded, and Briella's going to inherit everything. I just need to play the loving husband for a while. Besides, it's not like she has other options. Look at her." More laughter. More cruel, vicious laughter that felt like knives in my chest. I pressed myself against the brick wall, my heart pounding so hard I was afraid they might hear it. The flower arrangements trembled in my arms as my hands shook with a mixture of rage and devastation. This couldn't be happening. This man, who had been dating my daughter for 2 years, who had proposed to her with tears in his eyes, who had called me Mom and hugged me at family dinners, was talking about her like she was some kind of business transaction. "And the mom?" another voice asked. "Juanita seems pretty sharp." "Please," Blaine scoffed. "She's old and trusting. Treats me like the son she never had. She'll sign over anything I need once we're family. These older women are so desperate to see their daughters settled, they'll ignore red flags the size of Texas." I felt like I was going to be sick. The man I had welcomed into our family, the man I had trusted with my daughter's heart, was planning to use us both. And the way he talked about Briella's appearance, the casual cruelty in his voice when he called her names, it told me everything I needed to know about who he really was. "You're a piece of work, Blaine," one of his friends said. "But hey, if she's happy living in denial about what she looks like, and you get a comfortable life out of it, why not?" Exactly. And it's not like I'll have to pretend forever. Once I get what I need, well, divorces happen all the time. Poor Briella will be so heartbroken, but these things just don't work out sometimes. The casual way he said it, like he was discussing the weather, made my blood run cold. This wasn't just about money or convenience. This was calculated emotional abuse. He was planning to destroy my daughter's life, to take her money, her self-esteem, her trust, and then throw her away like garbage. I thought about Briella at home, probably trying on her wedding dress one more time, calling her cousin to finalize the seating arrangements, glowing with happiness because she thought she had found her soulmate. She had been so insecure about her weight since high school. always believing she wasn't pretty enough or thin enough. When Blaine came along and seemed to love her unconditionally, it had been like watching my daughter come back to life. But it was all a lie. Every "I love you," every tender moment, every promise he had made, all of it was part of an elaborate con game. I forced myself to stay calm, to think clearly despite the rage building inside me. I needed to process this information, to figure out what to do next. But as I stood there, listening to them continue their conversation about golf plans and bachelor party details as if they hadn't just revealed the most heartbreaking truth, I realized something else. I had been blind. Completely, foolishly blind. Looking back, there had been signs. The way Blaine's attention seemed to increase whenever we discussed financial matters, how he had subtly encouraged Briella to distance herself from her college friends, claiming they were jealous of her happiness. The way he had started making small comments about her eating habits, disguised as concern for her health. How he had gradually become the center of every family decision, every holiday plan, every important conversation. And I had welcomed it all. I had been so grateful that someone loved my daughter, so relieved that she wouldn't be alone after I was gone, that I had missed every single warning sign. The voices were moving away now, heading toward the main entrance of the country club. I waited until I couldn't hear them anymore before I moved from my hiding spot. My legs felt weak, and I had to lean against the wall for support. 3 days. The wedding was in 3 days, and 200 guests were expecting to witness what they thought would be a beautiful celebration of love. The deposits were paid, the dress was hanging in Briella's closet, and my daughter was planning to pledge her life to a man who saw her as nothing more than a meal ticket. But I wasn't going to let that happen. Not while I still had breath in my body. As I walked back to my car, leaving the flower arrangements by the service door, I realized that everything had changed in the span of 5 minutes. I wasn't just Juanita anymore, the proud mother of the bride. I had become something else entirely, a woman with a mission and nothing left to lose. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying Blaine's words over and over in my mind. Every cruel syllable, every heartless laugh, every calculated admission. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that what I had overheard was probably just the tip of the iceberg. If Blaine was capable of such deception, such calculated cruelty, what else was he hiding? The next morning, I called in sick to my part-time job at the library. At 64, I didn't really need to work anymore, but I enjoyed the routine and the interaction with people. Today, however, I had more important things to do. I started with social media. I'm not particularly tech-savvy, but Briella had taught me the basics of Facebook and Instagram over the years. Blaine's profiles were set to private, but I could see his list of friends and some of his tagged photos. What I found there made my stomach turn all over again. In photo after photo from recent months, photos that had been taken while he was supposedly committed to Briella, I saw him with other women. Not just casual group shots, but intimate pictures. His arm around a petite blonde at what looked like a wine bar. A selfie with a brunette where they were clearly in someone's bedroom. A beach photo from just last month where he was kissing a redhead's cheek while she laughed. But the most damning photo was from 3 weeks ago. Blaine was at what appeared to be an upscale restaurant, holding hands across the table with a woman who looked to be in her 30s. She was everything Briella wasn't. Thin, conventionally beautiful, perfectly made up. The caption read, "Another perfect evening with my lady." My hands shook as I screenshot the image. 3 weeks ago, Blaine had told Briella he was out of town on business. He had called her every night, telling her how much he missed her, how he couldn't wait to get home to his beautiful fiancé. I spent the next several hours digging deeper into his online presence. I found his LinkedIn profile, which revealed some interesting discrepancies. According to his resume, he worked as a sales manager for a medical equipment company, making what should have been a decent salary. But when I cross-referenced the company information, I discovered that the business had been sold and most of its employees laid off 6 months ago. So what was Blaine doing for work? How was he affording his expensive apartment, his designer clothes, his luxury car? I decided to drive by his apartment complex. The Windsor Heights was one of the most expensive residential buildings in our city, with rent starting at $3,000 a month for a one-bedroom unit. The parking garage was full of luxury vehicles: BMWs, Mercedes, Audis. Blaine's silver Lexus was parked in space number 47. I sat in my car for nearly an hour, watching the building. Just as I was about to leave, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Blaine emerged from the elevator with the same brunette from the bedroom selfie I had seen earlier. She was wearing workout clothes and carrying a gym bag, and they were laughing together like lovers. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that she had keys. She used them to open the mailbox, then handed Blaine a stack of mail before they walked out together, his hand on the small of her back in a gesture of intimate familiarity. She was living with him. This woman was living in his apartment while he was engaged to my daughter. I followed them at a distance as they drove to an upscale fitness center across town. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I watched them work out together. They spotted each other during weightlifting, shared water bottles, and at one point, he kissed her forehead when she completed a difficult exercise. This wasn't just cheating. This was a completely separate life. I waited in the parking lot until they finished their workout, then followed them to a coffee shop. From my car, I watched them sit at a corner table, holding hands and talking animatedly. At one point, the woman pulled out her phone and showed Blaine something that made him laugh so hard he nearly spit out his drink. My daughter was at home, probably addressing thank you cards for wedding gifts, while her fiancé was living with another woman. But I needed more than photos and observations. I needed proof that would be impossible to deny or explain away. The next morning, I did something I never thought I would do in my entire life. I hired a private investigator. Marcus Coleman had been recommended by a neighbor whose husband had cheated on her years earlier. He was a former police detective, now in his 50s, with kind eyes and a straightforward manner that put me at ease despite the awful circumstances. "Mrs. Rodriguez," he said as we sat in his modest office, "I have to ask, are you prepared for what we might find? Sometimes the truth is worse than what we initially suspect." I thought about Briella, about the way her face lit up whenever she talked about her future with Blaine, about how she had finally started to believe she deserved love and happiness. "I need to know everything," I told him. "My daughter's life depends on it." Marcus nodded and opened a new file. "I'll need a retainer of $1,000 to get started. Given what you've told me so far, I suspect this won't take long to unravel." 3 days later, Marcus called me with a preliminary report. What he had discovered was even worse than I had imagined. The woman living with Blaine was named Sandra Mitchell, and she wasn't just his girlfriend. She was his common-law wife. They had been together for 4 years and had been living together for the past 2 years. More shocking still, Sandra thought she was his only partner. Blaine had told her that he worked as a traveling consultant, which explained his frequent absences. But the investigation revealed even more disturbing details. Marcus had found evidence of at least 3 other women Blaine was involved with simultaneously. He was essentially running a sophisticated con game, maintaining multiple relationships with women who believed they were his only romantic partner. "He's got a system," Marcus explained during our meeting. "He targets women who are financially stable but emotionally vulnerable. He studies their schedules, their insecurities, their social circles. Then he creates a persona that's exactly what each woman thinks she needs." My head was spinning. "You mean he's done this before?" "Oh yes, I found records going back 7 years. He was briefly married to a woman in Phoenix who filed for divorce after discovering he had cleaned out her savings account. There was another woman in Denver who lost her house because she co-signed on loans for him. Always the same pattern. He finds women with money and low self-esteem, love bombs them into trusting him, then systematically drains their resources. I felt like I was going to be sick. And Sandra, does she know? No, she's completely in the dark. From what I can tell, she thinks she's in a committed, monogamous relationship. She works as a nurse and makes good money, which he's been using to fund his lifestyle and support his other relationships. The room seemed to be spinning. This wasn't just about protecting Briella from a bad marriage. This was about stopping a predator who was destroying multiple women's lives simultaneously. "There's one more thing," Marcus said, his expression growing even more serious. "I think he knows that you're suspicious." My blood turned to ice. "What do you mean?" "I had him under surveillance yesterday, and he received a phone call that seemed to upset him. Afterward, he drove by your house twice, slowly, like he was checking to see if you were home." The room went silent except for the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Blaine knew. Somehow he knew that I was onto him, and now I was running out of time. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. It was Thursday evening, just 2 days before the wedding, when I heard the doorbell ring. Through the peephole, I saw Blaine standing on my front porch, but something about his posture was different. Gone was the easy smile, the relaxed confidence I had grown accustomed to over the past 2 years. Instead, he stood rigid, his jaw clenched, his eyes cold. I knew I couldn't avoid this moment any longer. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door. "Hello, Blaine," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Briella's not here. She's at her final dress fitting." "I know where Briella is," he replied, his voice lacking any of its usual warmth. "I'm here to talk to you, Juanita." The way he said my name sent a chill down my spine. There was something predatory in his tone, something that made every instinct in my body scream danger. But I stepped aside and let him in. If we were going to have this conversation, I preferred it to happen on my terms, in my home. He walked into my living room without invitation, his eyes scanning the space like he was taking inventory. When his gaze landed on the family photos on the mantelpiece, pictures of Briella as a child, graduation photos, memories of happier times, his mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Nice house," he said, settling into my late husband's favorite armchair without being asked. "Must be worth what, 400,000? Maybe 500 in this market?" I remained standing, my hands clasped in front of me. "What do you want, Blaine?" He leaned back in the chair, studying me with those cold eyes. "I think you know what I want. The question is, what do you want, Juanita?" "I want my daughter to be happy and safe." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Safe from what? From me? Come on, we both know I've been nothing but good to Briella. I've given her confidence, made her feel beautiful, given her a reason to believe in love again. Isn't that what every mother wants for her daughter?" The casual way he spoke about manipulating my daughter's emotions made my stomach turn. "Is that what you call it? Making her feel beautiful by calling her a whale behind her back?" His expression didn't change, but I saw something flicker in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or calculation. "Ah," he said slowly. "So you were listening the other day. I wondered why you seemed so distant at dinner last night." I had tried to act normal during our weekly family dinner, but apparently I hadn't been as successful as I thought. "How could you say those things about her? How could you be so cruel?" Blaine shrugged, as if we were discussing the weather. "Look, Juanita, let's be adults here. We both know Briella isn't exactly a catch in the traditional sense. She's overweight, she's insecure, and she's not getting any younger at 32. Before me, when was the last time she had a serious boyfriend? College?" Each word was like a physical blow. The casual cruelty, the calculated way he was trying to make me doubt my daughter's worth, the smug confidence in his voice. It was almost too much to bear. "But here's the thing," he continued, leaning forward slightly. "I don't mind any of that. In fact, it works in my favor. Briella is grateful for my attention in a way that a more conventional woman might not be. She doesn't ask too many questions, doesn't make too many demands. And she comes with certain benefits." "Benefits," I repeated, the word tasting bitter in my mouth. "You, for instance, this house, the life insurance money from your husband, Briella's inheritance, the fact that you both trust me completely." He smiled, and for the first time, I saw him clearly. Not the charming man who had won over my daughter, but the predator who had been circling our family for 2 years. "You're not going to marry her," I said. It wasn't a question. "Oh, but I am. Tomorrow as planned. And it's going to be a beautiful ceremony. Briella will be radiant, you'll cry happy tears, and everyone will talk about what a lovely couple we make. He paused, his smile widening. The question is whether you're going to cause problems or whether you're going to be smart about this. I felt a chill run down my spine. What do you mean? Blaine stood up, walking over to the mantelpiece to examine the family photos more closely. He picked up a picture of Briella from her college graduation, the one where she was beaming with pride and possibility. I know about your doctor visits, Juanita, he said without looking at me. Dr. Martinez, the oncologist at Riverside Medical Center, twice a month for the past 6 months. My blood turned to ice. How could he possibly know about that? I had been so careful, so discreet. Even Briella didn't know about the cancer diagnosis, about the treatments I had been quietly undergoing. You're wondering how I know, Blaine continued, still studying the photograph. It's amazing what people will tell you when you show the right amount of concern. That receptionist, Maria, was so worried about you. Said you looked tired during your last visit. Hoped you were getting enough support from your family. He turned to face me, and I saw the full extent of his cruelty reflected in his eyes. It would be such a shame if Briella found out about your condition in the wrong way. You know how emotional she gets. If someone were to tell her, say, that you'd been hiding a serious illness from her, that you might not have long to live, that you'd been suffering alone, well, it might just break her heart completely. I gripped the back of the sofa to steady myself. He was threatening to weaponize my illness, to use my own desire to protect my daughter against me. You see, Juanita, I don't think you understand the position you're in. You can cause problems for me, certainly. You could try to convince Briella that I'm not who she thinks I am, but even if she believed you, which is doubtful, considering how invested she is in this fantasy, what would it accomplish? You'd destroy her happiness, break her heart, and leave her alone again. And for what? So she could spend her last months or years with you watching you die? The room seemed to be spinning. He knew about the diagnosis, about the prognosis that I had been trying so hard not to think about. Stage 3, the doctor had said. Treatable, but advanced. The chemotherapy was helping, but there were no guarantees. On the other hand, Blaine continued, his voice taking on a false gentleness, if you let things proceed as planned, Briella gets to have her fairy tale wedding. She gets to believe for as long as possible that she's loved and valued. And when the time comes that I move on, well, she'll have the support system of marriage, the financial security, and the confidence that comes from knowing someone chose her. You mean the confidence that comes from being abandoned and betrayed, I said, finding my voice again. Tomato? He replied with a shrug. The point is, you get to die knowing your daughter had some happiness, even if it was temporary. Isn't that better than dying knowing you destroyed her last chance at love? I stared at him, realizing that he had thought this through completely. He had researched my medical condition, identified my greatest vulnerability, and crafted his threat accordingly. This wasn't the desperate move of someone who had been caught off guard. This was the calculated manipulation of a practiced predator. And if I refuse? I asked. His smile turned cold. Then I tell Briella everything. About your cancer, about how you've been lying to her for months, about how you hired a private investigator to spy on me because you're so jealous of her happiness that you can't stand to see her loved. I paint you as a bitter, controlling mother who would rather see her daughter alone and miserable than married to someone she disapproves of. The cruel brilliance of it took my breath away. He would turn my love for Briella into a weapon against her, make my attempts to protect her look like selfish manipulation. She'll never forgive you, he continued, and she'll marry me anyway, but now she'll be completely dependent on me because she'll have no one else. No mother, no family support, no one to turn to when things get difficult. I realized in that moment that I was looking at pure evil, not the dramatic, obvious kind you see in movies, but the quiet, insidious evil that destroys lives from within. Blaine had studied us both, identified our weaknesses, and crafted a trap that seemed impossible to escape. But as I stood there, feeling the weight of his threats, I also realized something else. He had made one crucial mistake. He had underestimated how far a mother would go to protect her child. After Blaine left that evening, I sat in my living room for hours, staring at the walls and trying to process what had just happened. The man had essentially held my daughter's emotional well-being hostage, using my own illness as ammunition. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that his threats had revealed something crucial. He was desperate. If Blaine truly had all the power he claimed to have, if his position was as secure as he pretended, he wouldn't have needed to threaten me at all. The fact that he had shown his hand so completely meant that he saw me as a real threat to his plans. That gave me hope, but it also made me understand how dangerous the situation had become. The next morning, Friday, the day before the wedding, I watched from my kitchen window as Blaine's car pulled into my driveway again. But this time, he wasn't alone. Through the passenger window, I could see Briella's profile, and my heart sank. He was bringing her into this somehow. I opened the door before they could ring the bell. Briella practically bounced up the front steps, her face glowing with excitement despite the stress of last-minute wedding preparations. "Mom," as she said, wrapping me in a tight hug. "Blaine thought it would be nice if we had breakfast together before the rehearsal dinner tonight. You know, one last meal as just our little family before everything changes tomorrow." I looked over her shoulder at Blaine, who was watching me with those calculating eyes. He smiled and nodded, but I could see the threat beneath his pleasant expression. "That sounds lovely, sweetheart," I managed to say, stepping aside to let them in. As Briella chattered about final preparations, Blaine made himself comfortable in my kitchen, opening cabinets and pulling out dishes like he owned the place. The casual intimacy of his actions, the way he moved through my space with such confidence, made my skin crawl. "Juanita," he said, his voice warm and affectionate for Briella's benefit, "I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of picking up some of those Danish pastries you love from the bakery downtown. I know how much you enjoy them with your morning coffee." It was a small thing, but it demonstrated how thoroughly he had studied our family dynamics. He knew my preferences, my routines, my habits. Information he could use to manipulate or, if necessary, to hurt. While I made coffee, I listened to Briella talk about the final details. The flowers had been delivered, the band had confirmed their setup time, and her cousin had arrived from out of state to serve as maid of honor. Everything was falling into place for what should have been the happiest day of her life. "Mom, you seem quiet this morning," Briella said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "Are you feeling okay? You've seemed a little off this week." Before I could answer, Blaine jumped in smoothly. "Your mother's probably just emotional about tomorrow. It's a big day, watching your little girl get married. Right, Juanita?" The way he said it, with just the slightest emphasis on certain words, reminded me of his threats from the night before. He was letting me know that he could control this narrative, that he could interpret my every emotion and reaction for Briella's benefit. "Yes," I said carefully. "It's just overwhelming, thinking about how much everything is changing." Briella's expression softened with understanding. "Oh, Mom, I know this must be hard for you, especially since Dad isn't here to walk me down the aisle. But you know what? In some ways, this feels right. You're the one who raised me, who supported me through everything. Having you give me away tomorrow feels perfect." My throat tightened with emotion. The idea that I would be the one to literally hand my daughter over to this monster, to participate in the ceremony that would give him legal and emotional control over her life, was almost unbearable. "Actually," Blaine said, his voice taking on a tone of gentle concern, "speaking of family and changes, there's something I've been meaning to discuss with both of you." I felt my blood turn cold. What was he planning now? "Briella, sweetheart, I know how close you and your mother are, and I would never want to change that. But I've been thinking about our future together, about starting our own traditions and our own family unit. After we get back from our honeymoon, I'd love for us to have some time to really focus on each other, to build our foundation as a married couple." Briella nodded, clearly not understanding where this was leading. "So I was thinking," Blaine continued, reaching across to take her hand, "maybe we could establish some boundaries around family time. Nothing dramatic, Just healthy limits that will help us prioritize our marriage. Maybe family dinners once a month instead of every week, holiday visits that are planned in advance rather than spontaneous drop-ins, that sort of thing. I saw exactly what he was doing. Under the guise of normal newlywed boundary setting, he was beginning the process of isolating Briella from me, and he was doing it so skillfully that she was nodding along, probably thinking about how mature and thoughtful her husband-to-be was being. "That makes sense," Briella said. "I mean, we'll need to learn how to be a family together, right? And Mom, you'll probably want some space too to adjust to having more time to yourself." The casual way she accepted his manipulation broke my heart. She had no idea that this was the beginning of a systematic campaign to cut her off from everyone who truly cared about her. But Blaine wasn't finished. "And, Juanita, I hope you'll understand that sometimes Briella and I might need to make decisions without consulting the extended family. Financial decisions, career choices, that sort of thing. Nothing personal. Just part of growing up and becoming independent." There it was. He was laying the groundwork to control every aspect of Briella's life, including her access to the inheritance and property that he was ultimately after. And he was doing it so smoothly that she was probably going to thank him for helping her become more mature and self-sufficient. "Of course," I said, forcing myself to smile. "I want nothing more than for you both to be happy and independent." Blaine's smile was triumphant. "I knew you'd understand. You've raised such a wonderful, reasonable daughter. She gets that from you." As they prepared to leave for their respective pre-wedding errands, Blaine hung back for a moment while Briella used the bathroom. "I hope you enjoyed our little breakfast," he said quietly, his voice just loud enough for me to hear. I thought it was important for Briella to hear us discussing boundaries before the wedding. Sets the right tone, don't you think? I looked at him. This man who was systematically destroying my daughter's support system right in front of her eyes, and I realized that his cruelty knew no bounds. He wasn't just planning to use Briella financially and then abandon her. He was planning to isolate her completely first, to make sure she had nowhere to turn when he finally showed his true colors. "You're making a mistake," I said quietly. His eyebrows rose. "Am I? Because from where I'm standing, everything is going exactly according to plan. Tomorrow, Briella becomes my wife. Within a few months, she'll be used to having limited contact with you. Within a year, she'll be so dependent on me that she won't even remember what it felt like to make her own decisions. And then what? You just disappear with whatever money you can get?" Blaine shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe I stick around longer if the situation proves profitable enough. Either way, Briella will be completely under my control, and there won't be anything you can do about it." He paused, his expression growing more serious. "And just to be clear, Juanita, if you try anything tomorrow, anything at all that disrupts my wedding, I will make sure Briella knows exactly how sick you really are and exactly how you've been lying to her. But I won't just tell her. I'll tell her in the cruelest way possible. I'll make sure she knows that while she was planning her wedding, while she was sharing her happiness with you, you were keeping a terminal diagnosis secret. I'll make her believe that you didn't trust her enough to share the most important thing happening in your life." The word terminal hit me like a physical blow. My oncologist had been optimistic about my prognosis, but Blaine was right that the cancer was serious, that the outcome was uncertain. "She'll spend whatever time you have left feeling betrayed and abandoned," he continued. "And she'll turn to me for comfort, which will only make my job easier." As Briella returned from the bathroom, chattering about pickup times and final details, I realized that I was looking at a level of evil I had never encountered before. Blaine wasn't just a con man or a gold digger. He was someone who took genuine pleasure in psychological torture, who had turned the destruction of women's lives into an art form. But as I watched my daughter's trusting smile, as I listened to her excited plans for tomorrow, I also realized something else. I was done playing defense. It was time to go on the attack. And I had less than 24 hours to save my daughter's life. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled for 6 o'clock that evening at the Riverside Country Club. I had approximately 8 hours to put together a plan that would expose Blaine's true nature without destroying my daughter in the process. It seemed impossible, but I had to try. I started by calling Marcus, the private investigator. "I need everything you have on Blaine, and I need it today," I told him. "Photos, documents, witness statements, everything." "Mrs. Rodriguez, are you planning to confront him? Because I have to advise against that. Men like Blaine can become dangerous when they're cornered." "He's already dangerous," I replied. "And he's made it clear that he's not going to back down. The wedding is tomorrow, and after that it may be too late to save my daughter." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "All right, I'll compile everything and have it to you by 3 o'clock. But please, be careful. Document everything and consider having witnesses present for any confrontations." Next, I called Sandra Mitchell, the woman who was living with Blaine. It took me 3 attempts to reach her, and when she finally answered, she sounded confused and slightly suspicious. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I'm sorry. I don't think we've met." "We haven't," I said. "But we need to talk. It's about Blaine." There was a long silence. "What about Blaine?" "He's getting married tomorrow," I said simply. "To my daughter." I heard her sharp intake of breath, followed by what sounded like something being dropped. "That's impossible. Blaine and I are together. We live together. We've been planning our own engagement for months." "I know this is shocking," I said gently. "And I know you have no reason to trust me. But I have evidence, and I think you deserve to know the truth." It took some convincing, but Sandra agreed to meet me at a coffee shop downtown at 2 o'clock. She sounded shaken, confused, and increasingly angry as the reality of the situation began to sink in. My third call was to Dr. Martinez, my oncologist. I needed to understand exactly what Blaine knew about my condition and how he might have obtained that information. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I'm very sorry to hear about this breach of privacy," Dr. Martinez said after I explained the situation. "Patient confidentiality is sacred to us, but unfortunately, information can sometimes be obtained through social engineering, people calling and pretending to be family members, for instance. Is my prognosis really as bad as he's making it sound?" There was a pause. "Your cancer is serious, and we're treating it aggressively. But you're responding well to treatment, and I'm cautiously optimistic about your long-term outcome. The word terminal is not one I would use in your case." So Blaine had taken the limited information he had managed to obtain and twisted it to serve his purposes. It was exactly the kind of manipulation I had come to expect from him. By noon, I had one more crucial call to make. I dialed the number for Riverside Country Club and asked to speak with the event coordinator. "Mrs. Chen, this is Juanita Rodriguez, mother of the bride for tomorrow's wedding. I need to make a slight adjustment to tonight's rehearsal dinner timeline." "Of course, Mrs. Rodriguez. What can I help you with?" "I'd like to add a brief presentation during the cocktail hour. Just a few minutes for family members to share memories and well wishes for the couple. Nothing elaborate, just some photos and stories." Mrs. Chen assured me that would be no problem and that they could set up a small projection screen in the cocktail area if needed. At 2 o'clock, I met Sandra Mitchell at the coffee shop. She was exactly as beautiful as she had appeared in the photos, but her face was pale and her hands were shaking as she clutched her coffee cup. "Show me," she said without preamble. I handed her a folder containing printouts of Briella and Blaine's engagement announcement, photos from their engagement party, and copies of the wedding invitations that had been sent to 200 guests. Sandra stared at the documents for a long time, her face cycling through disbelief, hurt, and finally, rage. 4 years, she whispered. "I've been with him for 4 years. I thought we were going to get married. I thought he was working toward proposing to me." "I'm so sorry," I said. "I know this must be devastating." She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "There are others, aren't there? Other women he's doing this to." I nodded and showed her some of the evidence Marcus had compiled. Photos of Blaine with other women, documentation of his previous relationships, the pattern of manipulation and financial exploitation. "He told me he was a traveling consultant," Sandra said, her voice hollow. "Said that's why he was gone so much. I never questioned it because he always came home to me. Always made me feel like I was the center of his world when he was there. That's exactly what he did to my daughter, I said, and probably to all the others. Sandra was quiet for a long time, processing the information. Finally, she looked at me with a determination I hadn't expected. What do you need me to do? At 3 o'clock, Marcus arrived at my house with a thick folder of evidence. In addition to the photos and documentation we had already discussed, he had managed to obtain copies of financial records showing Blaine's debts and expenditures. He's in deep, Marcus explained. Credit card debt of over $50,000, back rent on his apartment, and what appears to be gambling losses. He's been using money from his various girlfriends to stay afloat, but it's not enough. He needs a bigger score. My daughter's inheritance, I said. Exactly. And based on these patterns, I'd guess he's planning to clean her out and disappear within 6 months to a year of the marriage. The evidence was overwhelming, but I still faced the challenge of presenting it in a way that would convince Briella without completely destroying her. My daughter was deeply invested in this relationship, emotionally and practically. She had already sent out invitations, taken time off work for the honeymoon, and told everyone in her life about her happiness. The humiliation of calling off the wedding at the last minute would be devastating, but not as devastating as the alternative. At 5:30, I arrived at the Riverside Country Club carrying a small bag containing printed photos, documents, and a laptop with additional evidence. Sandra had agreed to arrive at 6:15 during the cocktail hour, when most of the guests would be present. The cocktail area was beautifully decorated with white flowers and soft lighting. Briella looked radiant in a simple blue dress, greeting guests and accepting congratulations. Blaine worked the room with his usual charm, shaking hands with my relatives and making small talk with Briella's college friends. I watched him perform, saw how he made each person feel special and valued, how he adapted his personality to match what each guest seemed to want. It was a masterful display of manipulation, and it made me realize how completely he had fooled all of us. At 6:15, I saw Sandra enter the club. She had dressed simply but elegantly, and she moved through the room with purpose. I caught her eye and nodded toward the projection screen that had been set up in the corner. "Excuse me, everyone," I said, raising my voice to get the room's attention. "If I could have just a few minutes of your time, I'd like to share some memories and thoughts about Briella and Blaine." The guests gathered around, smiling and settling in for what they expected to be a heartwarming presentation. Briella beamed at me from across the room, clearly touched that I was taking this moment to honor her relationship. Blaine, however, looked suddenly alert. His eyes narrowed as he watched me move toward the laptop connected to the projection screen. "As Briella's mother," I began, "I've had the privilege of watching her grow into the wonderful woman she is today. And over the past 2 years, I've also had the opportunity to get to know Blaine." I clicked to the first slide, which showed a beautiful photo of Briella and Blaine from their engagement party. "They make a lovely couple, don't they?" I continued. "So happy, so committed to each other." The next slide showed another photo of the couple, this one from a family dinner. "Blaine has been such a wonderful addition to our family. So attentive, so caring, so devoted to Briella." I could see Blaine beginning to relax slightly, probably thinking this was going to be a standard mother of the bride speech. Then I clicked to the next slide. The image that appeared on the screen was one of the photos Marcus had obtained. Blaine with his arm around Sandra at what was clearly a romantic dinner. A gasp went up from the crowd. Briella's face went white. "But as I've recently learned," I continued, my voice steady despite my racing heart, "Blaine has been devoted to several women simultaneously." The next slide showed Blaine kissing another woman at what appeared to be a beach resort. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet some of the other women in Blaine's life." Chaos erupted in the room. Guests began talking in shocked whispers. Briella made a sound like a wounded animal, and Blaine started moving toward me with fury in his eyes. But before he could reach me, Sandra stepped forward. "Hello, everyone," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the room. "My name is Sandra Mitchell, and I've been living with Blaine for the past 2 years. Until this afternoon, I thought I was the only woman in his life. The room fell completely silent. The silence in the room was deafening. 200 guests stood frozen, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Briella remained motionless near the bar, her face a mask of shock and disbelief. And Blaine, for the first time since I had known him, looked completely out of control. "This is insane," he said, his voice loud and desperate. "You're all listening to a sick woman who's clearly having some kind of breakdown. Juanita has been acting erratically for weeks, making wild accusations because she can't handle the fact that her daughter is getting married and moving on with her life." But Sandra wasn't finished. She stepped closer to the center of the room, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I brought some things with me tonight," she said, pulling out her phone. "Photos of the apartment Blaine and I share, copies of our lease agreement with both our names on it, text messages he sent me just this morning telling me he loved me and couldn't wait to get home tonight." She looked directly at Briella, her expression filled with genuine sympathy. "I'm so sorry you're finding out this way. I had no idea you existed until your mother called me this afternoon." Blaine's mask was slipping completely now. The charming, confident facade had been replaced by something ugly and desperate. "She's lying," he said, pointing at Sandra. "This is some kind of elaborate setup. Juanita probably paid her to come here and say these things." But the evidence was overwhelming, and the guests were beginning to murmur among themselves. I could see recognition dawning on several faces. People putting together inconsistencies they had noticed but dismissed, remembering times when Blaine's stories hadn't quite added up. Marcus appeared at the edge of the room, having positioned himself there as we had planned. He stepped forward with a manila folder in his hands. "I'm Marcus Coleman, a licensed private investigator," he announced. "Mrs. Rodriguez hired me to conduct a background check on Mr. Blaine Morrison. What I found was a pattern of fraud, manipulation, and financial exploitation targeting vulnerable women." He opened the folder and began pulling out documents, credit reports showing debts of over $50,000. Bank records indicating unauthorized access to previous partners' accounts. Police reports from 3 different states documenting complaints filed by women who discovered they had been systematically deceived and robbed. Briella finally found her voice. "Stop," she whispered, then louder. "Stop. Please, just stop." All eyes turned to her. She was shaking, tears streaming down her face, but there was something else in her expression that I couldn't quite read. "Blaine," she said, her voice barely audible. "Tell me this isn't true. Tell me there's some explanation for all of this." For a moment, I thought he might continue to lie, might try to manipulate his way out of the situation. But something in Briella's face, perhaps the complete devastation he had caused, seemed to break something inside him. "Fine," he said, his voice turning cold and vicious. "You want the truth? Here's the truth. I never loved you, Briella. How could I? Look at yourself. You're overweight, insecure, and desperate for attention from any man who shows you the slightest interest." The cruelty in his voice made several guests gasp audibly, but he wasn't finished. "I stayed with you because you were easy to control, and because your family has money. That's it. That's the beginning and end of our great love story. I've been counting down the days until I could get access to your inheritance and get out of this joke of a relationship." The room erupted in shocked murmurs and angry voices. Several male guests stepped forward as if to confront Blaine physically, but Briella held up her hand. "Get out," she said quietly. "What?" Blaine sneered. "Get out," she repeated, her voice growing stronger. "Get out of this room, get out of my life, and if you ever come near me or my family again, I'll have you arrested." For a moment, Blaine looked like he might argue. Then his expression twisted into something truly ugly. "You'll regret this," he said, looking not at Briella, but at me. "All of you will regret this. You have no idea who you're dealing with." But even as he made his threats, I could see that his power was broken. He was no longer the confident predator who had walked into my living room the night before. He was just a small, cruel man whose schemes had been exposed. Security guards, summoned by Mrs. Chen, appeared at the entrance to escort Blaine from the building. As he was led away, he turned back one last time. "Enjoy your last few months together," he called out, his voice carrying across the room. "Because when Juanita dies, Briella, you'll have nothing and no one. And you'll remember that I was the only man who was ever willing to pretend to love you." The guards forced him through the doors before he could say anything else, but his final words hung in the air like poison. Briella stood in the center of the room, surrounded by friends and family, but looking utterly alone. Then, slowly, she turned to look at me. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Are you dying?" The room fell silent again. This was the moment I had been dreading, the conversation I had hoped to avoid until I had more answers, more hope to offer along with the diagnosis. But there was no hiding anymore, no more protecting her from difficult truths. "I have cancer," I said simply. "I've been receiving treatment for 6 months, and the doctors are optimistic about my prognosis. But yes, it's serious." Briella closed her eyes, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. When she opened them again, there was pain there, but also something else. Relief, maybe, or resolution. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. I looked around the room at all the people watching us, at this moment that should have been private but had become unavoidably public. "Because I wanted to protect you," I said. "I wanted you to focus on your happiness, your future, your wedding. I didn't want my problems to overshadow your joy." Briella walked across the room toward me, and for a moment, I was afraid she might be angry, might feel as betrayed as Blaine had threatened she would. But when she reached me, she wrapped her arms around me and held me tight. "I don't need protection, Mom," she whispered in my ear. "I need honesty. I need to be part of your life, the real parts, not just the easy parts." We held each other for a long time while the room gradually began to clear. Guests offered quiet words of support before leaving, understanding that this family needed privacy to process what had just happened. Finally, it was just Briella, Sandra, Marcus, and me in the elegant room that had been decorated for a celebration that would never happen. "I'm so sorry about your wedding," Sandra said to Briella. "I know this must be devastating." Briella wiped her eyes and looked at Sandra with genuine gratitude. "Thank you for coming forward. I know it must have been difficult for you too." Sandra nodded. "He fooled me completely. Made me believe I was special, that our relationship was different from anything he'd experienced before. I feel like such an idiot." "We all fell for it," I said. "He's clearly had a lot of practice." Marcus cleared his throat gently. "If you're interested in pursuing criminal charges, I have enough evidence to support fraud and identity theft charges. The other women he's victimized would likely be willing to testify as well." Briella considered this for a moment, then shook her head. "I just want him gone. I want to put this behind us and move forward." Over the following weeks, Briella and I began the process of rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of complete honesty. She came with me to my medical appointments, learned about my treatment plan, and became an active participant in my care, rather than someone I needed to protect from difficult realities. The wedding venue was paid for, the deposits were lost, and there were awkward conversations with relatives who had traveled from out of state. But none of that mattered compared to the relief of knowing that my daughter was safe. 3 months later, Briella had started therapy to work through the emotional manipulation she had endured. She was dating again, but slowly and carefully, with a much clearer understanding of her own worth and what she deserved in a relationship. My cancer treatment was progressing well, the tumors were shrinking, and Dr. Martinez was increasingly optimistic about my long-term prognosis. Having Briella's support and involvement made the entire process more bearable. One evening, as we sat together in my living room watching old photo albums, Briella looked up at me with a thoughtful expression. "Mom," she said, "do you think I would have figured it out eventually? About Blaine, I mean?" I considered the question carefully. "I think you're stronger and smarter than you give yourself credit for," I said. "But he was very good at what he did. He studied you, learned your vulnerabilities, and crafted his manipulation accordingly. It might have taken years for you to see through it." She nodded slowly. I keep thinking about what my life would have been like if you hadn't intervened, if I had married him. You don't have to think about that, I said. It didn't happen. But it almost did. And the scariest part is that I was so grateful for his attention, so convinced that I didn't deserve any better, that I probably would have stayed with him even if I had discovered some of the truth. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, processing the weight of what might have been. I'm going to be more careful in the future, Briella said finally. But I'm also going to be more confident, more willing to trust my own instincts and value my own worth. 6 months after the canceled wedding, I received a phone call from Marcus. Blaine had been arrested in another state for running a similar con on a wealthy widow. The evidence we had compiled, combined with testimony from his other victims, had helped build a strong case against him. He's looking at 5 to 10 years, Marcus told me, and there are civil suits pending that will likely bankrupt him completely. I felt a sense of justice, but more than that, I felt peace. The threat was over, my daughter was safe, and we had both emerged from the experience stronger and more honest with each other. 2 years later, I was officially in remission, and Briella was engaged to a man who truly valued and respected her. This time, the wedding planning process was completely different. Her fiancé, David, was patient and supportive, encouraging Briella to make decisions based on what she actually wanted rather than what she thought would please others. And most importantly, there were no secrets between us. No hidden diagnoses, no protected feelings, no manipulation disguised as love. As I watched Briella try on wedding dresses for her real wedding, I realized that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the truth, even when it's painful. Even when it destroys their illusions and forces them to rebuild their life from scratch. Because a life built on truth, however difficult, is always stronger than one built on lies. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.